Hello, I'm Dr. Larry Carnes, and welcome to Books of the Month. We're so glad that you could join us, and we have a very special, very exciting guest with us. Miss Phyllis, how are you today?
I am fine, Dr. Carnes. Thank you for asking.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. You've written this fascinating book, The God Who Sees Me. Introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about this fascinating book.
Well, I have been teaching the Bible for many, many years in the classroom and, of course, to my own children and other people. So I'm pretty well familiar with the Bible and what's in it. The prompt for this book was whenever I was expecting my first child, and all of the things that women usually go through began to run through my mind about how do I bring up this child? How do I make sure this child is going to be following the Lord? And how do I instill faith in this child? So I began to think about it. And then for some reason, I was prompted to look in the Exodus chapter 2, which had the story of Jochebed, a young slave lady who was in a foreign country, in a culture or around a culture that she didn't know, didn't understand really, but was very oppressive. And there was a racial prejudice and hatred that she faced every day. So how do you, when your faith is under fire like that, what do you do and how do you cope? And I began to read and study with her about her and found out that she had 3 children. And you know that every one of them turned out to be a key factor that God used in a magnificent way, unbelievable way, really. I thought, what did she do? How did she do this? So for instance, her first, Miriam, was a prophetess and became very influential. Her second was Aaron, who was the first priest of the Israelite people.
Yeah.
We all know Moses. You can't miss Moses. He was an absolute pivotal factor in the history of the entire world. And we still study about him today and hear about him today. So I thought this has got to come from, of course, the Lord was with them at all time, but this has got to come from the family. So I began to study that, and hopefully this is the book that I'm trying to present, is what key factors are there in that book that maybe prompted this. So this is where we start. Yes.
Now, it's fascinating because you say the God who sees. I think many times we may lose, because we're so accustomed to our sensory perception, that we cease to see from a spiritual perception many times.
Right.
And so with what you so elegantly lay out in the book, The God Who Sees, you say the divine king has issued his supreme command, and we know Hebrew males aged 2 years or younger must die. And so that's a mandate that can be shocking. I mean, it can be traumatic to a mother.
Sure.
And their child, my child falls. So how do I navigate this journey? You say there's a God who sees all.
Right.
And he will strategically give us the wisdom and the knowledge to be able to navigate this thing. You lay it out so eloquently. Now, you say that this young lady's father begins to tell her about a powerful God who watches over his people. God,
right.
Talk to us about that.
Well, we often forget that when you're under this kind of pressure, this kind of fire, this everyday oppression, and then all of a sudden, what I said, the divine king, that doesn't mean the God of heaven. That means the Pharaoh, who considered himself divine, and he was divine for his people, and they considered him a god and the supreme God. Yes. But Jochebed knew that wasn't true. He wasn't the supreme God. So she discovers that. And that has to be a thing that sometimes the family members and sometimes your friends will say that, no, God doesn't see us. This wouldn't be happening to us if God was really watching us. If God really cared, if he really knew, this wouldn't be happening to us. But she discovers that, yes, there is a promise. There's promises that God made way back in the day of the fathers, and they have come through, and you look around and see they're happening right now in her life. They were happening. And so she said, this has already been predicted.
Yes.
He's still there.
Yes, he still sees.
Still
You know,
sees.
our God is a covenantal God.
Right.
And I think it when I look at it and listen, I talk about there's a visitation and there's a revelation, there's an impartation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you so eloquently lay out here, now her father reminded her of this powerful God.
Mm-hmm.
But you're giving us insights into the life of the mother of Moses, which we don't get a lot of insight into that life.
Right.
And you're talking about the faith that she had to trust God in the midst of the struggles, in the midst of the challenges.
Right.
That is so inspiring as you lay this out so eloquently. Here's something that I see here as I was reviewing your book. Is there a God who watches over an oppressed people? If so, where is he? Why doesn't he act to save the children? Questions that people have every day. Give us some insights into that fascinating questions.
Well, that is what we hear today. There's a lot of evil in the world. It seems like it's getting worse all the time. At least we think it is. And so many people say, if there was a good God, that wouldn't be happening. That would not be happening. So we have to look and say, all right, all of these children died. They died. They were ripped out of their mother's arms and just thrown in the river. And that's what the Bible tells us. They were just ripped away and thrown in the river. But a few of them did survive. Now, which ones did God choose to survive and which ones did he not?
Yeah.
But the ones who died, they were still valuable to God, and he still used them. So we have to realize that, as it said, God says, my ways are not your ways, and your ways are not my ways. Just trust me with what I'm doing. Trust me with your life. Because Jochebed could look back and say, Father Abraham had a vision. He said that our people were going to be enslaved. This came from her father and the fathers before and the fathers before. They were going to be enslaved for nearly a little over 400 years. And they were going to have some really rough treatment. Well, that's what was going on in her life. And you have to keep that in mind. There are promises that cannot be broken with God. He says, I won't break my promise. I swore to you that all of these things would happen. You have to keep that in mind. And that's what we keep in mind today, too. We have promises that cannot be broken because God said this. He swore to this to his people. This is what's going on. And he said, you will have trouble. You will have trouble. There's no, you may have trouble. You could have trouble. You will have trouble.
It's part of life.
That's right. You
know, Jesus so eloquently states it. It's in John 16:33. He says, in this world, you will have tribulation.
That's right.
He says just what you've just said, but don't worry about it. I like to say, don't trip. Be here. I've overcome the world. Now, and when you so eloquently lay this out, you take us back. He says, but here, watch this now. It's conditional. If you abide in me,
true,
and my words abide in you, then. And we found that the children of Israel many times ceased to abide in God. And so the decisions and the choices brought many of the actions that were happening in their lives.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, it is so eloquent. You say something here. This young mother's journey through terror, doubt, grief, and betrayal reveals a God who not only sees her plight, but also has a plan. My God, that spoke volumes. Talk to us about that.
Well, that's true. As we said, God made promises. He has a plan, and he's worked it out. And if we look back at that plan, especially right around this time when Moses was born, and then, of course, when he came back, all of this was already planned. It was already seen. It was already there. We can look back and see it, but there's also a plan for us too, that there's going to be a plan. We don't know what it is necessarily going forward. We don't know the future, but we got to say there's a plan. There is a plan.
You know, now as you're speaking, it just keeps bringing back, you know, before I placed you, I knew you and ordained you to be.
That's right. That's right.
and you're speaking and seeing everything that this mother had to navigate through along with the children.
Mm-hmm.
It just speaks volumes, as you have so eloquently written this for us. The promises of God are greater than our challenges.
That's right. That's right.
I thought,
Absolutely.
so fascinating. What would be some keys as our viewing audience are viewing, and you have their attention here? What would be some keys that, or some nuggets that they can glean from this fascinating book that you've written?
Well, I hope to tell them that, first of all, God does have a plan, and that bad circumstances do not nullify the plan. Bad circumstances do not mean God doesn't love you, that he doesn't see you, and that there is a plan. And if you trust him, he's probably going to show you how to navigate it. Now, it doesn't say that you're going to get out without any bumps or bruises. It just says you're going to come out victorious. You're going to come out victorious. And I hope to share some things too about that. How do you get your children to buy into this plan? How do you get them to do it? And one of the key things is on Leviticus 9 and 11. It says, teach these things to your children that God has told you when you walk by the way, when you're sitting at home, when you're ready to go to bed, and when you get up in the morning. It just says, keep it in their mind, keep their minds renewed, and help them to learn it and to appropriate it into their own lives and live it as an example.
Yes. I was speaking with my grandson just this past weekend, and we were talking about some things of God, and I was speaking to him about Holy Spirit. And, and I said, well, when we talk to God, we talk to God, we encourage ourselves, we build ourselves up. Jude says we build up our most holy faith when we're communicating with God in the Spirit. He said, Poppy, you didn't say that the last time. I said, didn't say which part the last time, Caleb, about building up our most holy faith. 8 years old. But he remembered just what you're saying. Remembered that and the conversation from the last time. Wow. Now I'm thinking this young kid is getting it. So that what you said is just so right on point. Train up a child in the way that they should go. And when they are mature, they won't depart. But in the process of maturing, they may take some steps that aren't exactly what we trained them up to take.
That's right.
But those goals that you talk about and those values, it is so, you're so right on point. We need this. We need this book, The God Who Sees. I want you to do something for us.
What is that?
Share, if you will, some contact information, be it website, email, anything like that, where our viewing audience can get in touch with you.
All right. Well, my email would be a good place to do it, because I can send you I can answer questions, I can send you material, but it's Phyllis Ryser 5@gmail.com. Now, Phyllis, PHYLLIS, 2 L's and 1 S, Ryser, that's R, and then there's a Y, because some people tend to misspell it, Y, or YS. This is in Sam, ER. 5, the number 5 at gmail.com. That's a good place to do, or a text or call 903-304-9590.
That is fascinating. And I know that they can go to Amazon and get the book. It's there.
It's going to be the new release is going to be out before the end of the year. So that will be I would recommend the new release. It's going to be out before the end of the year.
So there's a new release coming out.
There's a new release.
Yeah.
That's a little more in depth. That tells a little bit more, and that kind of goes more into what we need to hear.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest today. We so appreciate you being here. Listen, I'm Dr. Larry Carnes. You've been privileged to have our special guest, Ms. Phyllis Ryser. Go get the book. Join us again next month right here for Books of the Month. Thank you so much for being with us.